Hello, my name is Riley Fitzpatrick, and I will be discussing the occupational and environmental health tragedy ascribed to the mining and milling of blue asbestos in Wittenoom, Australia. Outlined are my main objectives for this presentation. By the end, I hope you will be able to identify the enabling factors that led to contamination in Wittenoom, identify the main sources of blue asbestos, and understand how contamination impacted the community. Here is a brief table of contents for the presentation, walking you through how the presentation will flow. I will use a timeline throughout the presentation to guide us in our exploration of what happened in this small town in Western Australia. So our story begins in the early 1900s when Lang Hancock discovers the blue asbestos deposits in what will be known as the town of Wittenoom. Wittenoom was a small single-industry town located in the arid region of Western Australia, nearly 1,400 kilometers from the state's capital city of Perth. The discovery of blue asbestos came at the right time. In 1923, a ton of blue asbestos could fetch 80 pounds of sterling in England, making it a profitable commodity. Blue asbestos, formerly known as crocodilite, can be seen in Figure 2. This asbestos was commonly used to insulate steam engines. While blue asbestos had been identified in the early 1900s, the remote and rugged terrain delayed large-scale mining operations. In 1939, crocodilite mining at Wittenoom commenced on a small pick-and-shovel scale. In 1943, the Colonial Sugar Refinery, or CSR, purchased the mines and began to increase production rapidly. Should be noted that CSR was a corporation with no experience in mining. There were 3 mines in operation in Wittenoom: Empire, Wittenoom, and Colonial. Together, these mines produced approximately 161,000 tons of asbestos and were the country's only source of blue asbestos. However, much of the asbestos from Wittenoom was shipped to Europe. Colonial Mine, which operated for 13 years, produced nearly 120,000 tons of asbestos, or roughly was 81% of total production. All 3 of the mines closed by 1966. In 1947, the town of Wittenoom was built at the entrance to Wittenoom Gorge, 10 kilometers from the Wittenoom mine and mill. At the time, unemployment was high in Western Australia, which made Wittenoom an attractive prospect for workers. Most miners were young, single men because conditions in the mine were tough. As you can see in image 3, the mines were small, hot, and cramped, and asbestos dust was everywhere. As Wittenoom expanded, families of miners came to reside in the town. Image 5 and 6 show the wives and children of miners that resided in the area. Asbestos dust was just accepted as part of living in Wittenoom town. As you can see in image 6, kids born and raised in the town learned to live and play amongst the dust. From 1940 to 1994, over 20,000 people lived in the town of Wittenoom. Figure 2 shows the population in Wittenoom over time. As the mines ramped up production, population steadily increased. In 1966, when the mines officially closed, the population dropped dramatically, and by 1994, virtually no one remained. As a result of the tough working conditions, the workforce at Wittenoom was highly transient. Table 1 shows the average length of residence during this time. 60% of workers ended up staying for 6 months or less. Sadly, this factor contributed to its widespread health impact, as more people staying short periods of time led to more people with asbestos-related diseases. Before mining even begun in Wittenoom, the relationship between asbestos and disease was strengthening. In 1948, following a visit to the mines, Dr. Eric Saint made the first formal complaint to the Australian Public Health Department. The doctor warned of the unhealthy dust levels in the mines, the lack of extractors, and the dangers of asbestos. In 1961, sadly, Dr. Eric's predictions started to come true, and the first case of mesothelioma from the mine was reported. It is estimated that over 2,000 people died in Wittenoom due to exposure to asbestos. The breakdown of death by asbestos-related disease are shown in Figure 3. Mesothelioma was the most common asbestos-related disease that resulted in the death of residents. Mesothelioma is a cancer caused by asbestos exposure. The malignant tumors form in the lining of the lungs, abdomen, or heart, and it has a low rate of survival. Figure 4 breaks down death by occupation or exposure to asbestos. Unsurprisingly, workers in the mines and mills who handled asbestos day in, day out were the most susceptible to mesothelioma. However, residents in the town, including women and children and other non-mining workers, represent almost a third of those who died from mesothelioma. The rest of the deaths were observed in wharfies, or waterside workers who were responsible for loading the asbestos onto the ships. Compared to miners, the wharfies had relatively shorter exposures to asbestos, but were still susceptible. Australia has one of the highest incident rates of malignant mesotheliomas in the world. More specifically, Western Australia leads the states in highest incident of malignant mesotheliomas. Figure 5 shows the increasing number of malignant mesotheliomas in Western Australia from 1980 to 2000. It's important to look at later dates of diagnosis, as mesotheliomas have a long latency period of 20 to 50 years from exposure. This bar graph compares the rate of mesothelioma diagnosis between Western Australia and the other states and territories. The rate of mesothelioma in Western Australia is double the average of the country and far exceeds the individual territories and states, which has been credited to the asbestos mining in the region. Finally, in 1966, the mine was shut down due to unprofitability and growing health concerns from asbestos in the area. Following the closure of the mines, the government began to monitor the air quality of the area as well as the health of its residents. In 1978, the government announced the closure of Wittenoom due to asbestos-related concerns. In 2007, the town was officially degazetted and removed from signs and books. You can see its remnants in image 7 and 8. After nearly 20 years of asbestos mining, Wittenoom is the largest contaminated site in the southern hemisphere. The impact of Wittenoom on its workers and residents is still being felt. 2,000 deaths are connected to asbestos exposure at the site, and Western Australia has the highest rate of mesothelioma in the country. This ghost town will remain contaminated and uninhabited until government commits to sufficiently cleaning up the area. Thank you so much.